just identify a few themes that I think frame the challenges and at this stage, and I can always speak in more detail to those that the commissioners may wish to follow up on. So we have a real need to strengthen both the judicial and the staff component of the court. We don't have enough judges, and we don't have enough staff to deliver on our mandate. I believe we need to prioritize clearing the restitution and the labour tenancy backlog. Parliament will be fully aware of those statistics, both in context of both labour tenancy and restitution. We're looking at very serious backlogs that are affecting rural people in very profound ways, and people are understandably very frustrated and angry about those delays, and we need to clear those backlogs. Nonetheless, I believe we need simultaneously to position ourselves to embrace our expanded jurisdiction. As I think most commissioners will know, that the expanded jurisdiction of the Land Court is quite ambitious. And I believe, I won't mention the acts at this stage, but what it does do is it brings us squarely into a space where we're not only going to be dealing with restitution and Esther and labour tenancy, but embracing the idea of redistribution, I think, more fully in our court. And it gives us, I think, a greater ability to meet the broader challenges of land justice that this country is facing, and we need to embrace that fully. And that's a real challenge, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. Then turning to the more practical, I would suggest that we currently have a unique opportunity to introduce the digital court system that JP Mlambo has piloted in Gauteng. Now, the Land Court went live with this system on the 23rd of September, and it's going to take us time to roll it out. But what our challenge is that what we need to achieve with this is effectively to reach rural spaces, to take court online into the rural areas. And so that's quite a lengthy conversation, and it's a real challenge. But what I'd like us to think about, is the idea that someone who's living in a rural space will ultimately be able to access court papers on their smartphone without having to get into a car and travel or raise funds to share a car to drive to a town to get court papers. You can access court papers on your phone if we manage to roll out Court Online, which everyone based in Gauteng will know what it can achieve. So it's a unique opportunity, but it also presents immense challenges. But I believe we can do it. I can speak to the practicalities of what I'd like to do on each of these topics, but I would like to be guided by the commissioners as to which ones they would like me to focus on. But allow me then let me just raise a couple of other practical issues. I believe we need to strengthen various of our internal systems within the court system.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Strengthen what?
Some of our internal systems.
Or internal
systems, yes,
right.
Within the court system, within our court system. So what I'm thinking about here are issues such as mediation. Again, it's an ambition of the Land Court Act that mediation gets more fully embraced. And we're not yet in a position to deliver that practically. We are working on it. And I believe we're going to get there, but I think that's critically important. One can see the potential benefit of that, for example, in the many disputes within communities who are still trying to finalize restitution matters. 20 years on, it's unsurprising that you have divisions within communities about how to resolve these issues. And I believe mediation, properly resourced mediation tool will facilitate the finalization, the satisfactory finalization of those matters. Another issue would be our assessor pool. There again, assessors are a critical feature of what we do because it allows us to bring in people from diverse backgrounds to sit with judges when adjudicating matters, especially restitution matters, to bring in different perspectives in understanding our history when we deal with those cases. I believe we need to improve our interpreter pool. For obvious reasons, language in our court is a real issue. And we do make heavy use of interpreters. In my experience, when we do it all the time, sometimes we'll have as many as 4 languages in the room. And as I see it, it's really critical that the people who are assisting with translations are highly skilled and able to speak in what is described in courts before me in deep vernacular, to do it really effectively so that the court process is dignified and restorative of people's dignity. The other issue the other internal system that I would say we need to focus on is stakeholder engagement. We engage with our stakeholders frequently, and there are many of them. The JP has provided, I think, extremely effective leadership in getting this going in the last couple of months. And we've seen many stakeholder engagements already on the go. But we do need to bring people into our discussions, and that's going to take time, and we need to focus on that. And then I'd like to highlight 2 more issues. The first would be what is a critical issue about accessing the land court. I believe that as we sit here now, far too few South Africans truly understand or know how to access us in Randburg, or even know where we are. And that's a problem. The court that we build needs to be a bastion of access to land justice, and that means we have to be accessible. And in order to achieve that, there are many sub-themes. I'll raise a couple, I think, which will be known to commissioners. There's a profound inequality of arms in the litigation space that come in between litigants who come before us in their representation. There's a new land unit at the Legal Aid in Legal Aid South Africa, who are currently being brought into the space and are being given a lot of experience and responsibility in fantastic matters. And I believe that in 5 years, we are going to see a new generation of land lawyers coming out in this country. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And we need to put our energy into making that real and widening access to land law amongst mainstreaming, I think is the language I used previously in this space, mainstreaming land law amongst practitioners, bringing more people in. It's also about access to advice officers. We've been working on that, and I think we're making good progress there. And it's also about how we as a court communicate with the public. I think we've got quite a lot to learn from the Constitutional Court in how it's gone about communications with its court summaries. I think the Constitutional Court was the first court to routinely prepare court summaries. Yep. And it's now been rolled out, I think, in other courts. And I wonder whether that's not a tool that in our court we can use quite effectively to communicate broadly. But we would have to do it in, I think, quite creative ways because of language. We'd need to make sure that these summaries are translated, and we'd have to make sure that they're distributed in ways that can reach people in rural areas and perhaps through radio stations and social media. So I think those are some ideas. And then I suppose, finally, I'd just like to emphasize this issue of mainstreaming land law. For far too long, land law has been a kind of marginalized subject that's seen as a sort of specialty. And yes, of course, those of us who've worked in the area can say that we've acquired a level of specialism. But any practitioner can practice in land law. You just need exposure to the work. And you need exposure to the work. That's what you need. And I'd like to see far more lawyers in this country knowing land law. And I'd like to see, and this is in a sense beyond our purview as judges, but we are engaging with stakeholders about university curricula and trying to see land law. Well, what I'd love to see if I had the influence. To achieve this, I would love to see land law being a requirement in any law degree in this country, that any South African getting a law degree needs to have a good understanding of our history of land disposition and how it's affected our spatial geography, because we're still living with it day to day. Perhaps I'll stop there, but I'm happy to speak to, perhaps with questions, I'm happy to speak to what we're doing in each of those spaces, because we've been working on each of them in the last few months.
I have no doubt that the commissioners will flesh out some of the issues with you. But thanks for that synopsis. You seem to have your finger right on the pulse of things. And I must just comment that the challenges you mentioned cut across the entire judiciary. Access to justice still remaining pie in the sky for many ordinary South Africans for various reasons. And then you have all the challenges, including the staffing issue, both on the judicial and administrative fronts, which is terrible, especially with the burgeoning litigation that engulfs our drowning courts. I mean, everybody knows that litigation has just exploded in this country. And unfortunately, there's been no concurrent, beefing up of resources, human and otherwise, in the judiciary. So I wish you all the best, all of us,
Yes.
all the best as we tackle these issues. Do you have any reserved judgments?
I've got one reserve judgment, which is, it's still within the 3-month period, which I will be handing down in the next couple of weeks.
All right, so you've managed to juggle the admin and the core judicial duties.
I have, yes. I mean, it is a challenge, and there's ongoing conversations with the JP about how to balance that and to work out where one's resources are best spent. So I have been carrying a very heavy judicial load over this time as well, especially in the case management space, which I think anyone familiar with our processes will know that case management is absolutely critical for getting matters onto our roll. Our roles are not full enough. So I've had a very heavy case management load, and I love doing that. So it's quite hard to pull me out of those cases. But yes, we're going to have to learn how to, all of the judges need to get involved in all of the projects in the courts. The approach of our JP is inclusive. She wants to see all of us involved in building the court and trying to make the best use of our talents and to distribute work accordingly. So it is going to be a juggling act, I think, going forward for all of us.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to give me tips on how you manage to maintain the balance, because I'm struggling. All right, I'll hand over to Judge President. I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Good morning, JP. I'll hand over to Judge President Karelse to put questions to you if she has any.
Good morning, JP.
To get used to this, thank you. Judge Cowan, you have touched on a few of the issues, our challenges, but what is your understanding of our operational challenges in relation to our caseload, financial resources, logistics, and human resources? If you could just, and I think most of our meetings currently have been around these issues.
Caseload, logistics, management.
And I think you can come in here with the project.
Yes,
the very ambitious project that we've undertaken at the Land Court. It's the Historical Restitution and Labor Tenants Project. If you can just
speak to that.
Yeah, speak to that as well.
Thank
please.
you very much. Yes, sorry, I turned off my microphone again. Yes, there's a project in the court which we call the Historical Cases Project. And it's a project that I spoke about briefly during my last interview. And what it's really aimed at doing is understanding why it is that there are so many cases that get referred to the land court that become inactive and are not finalized. And we've been looking at those statistics, which have been coming out in various ways. And we believe we don't have finalized data yet, but we believe that we're probably looking at about 1,500 cases that have become inactive. And we can close our files in the sense of we as judges can't do anything about it at this moment, but one can't close those files with a clean conscience in circumstances where we know very well that the reasons why these cases are not being finalized are probably no fault of the claimants or the applicants. So the project is aimed at making sure that we understand that data, that we know exactly which cases have become inactive and why, and that we find ways to reactivate them. So there are two strategies for reactivation. The one is about putting cases that are what we can flag as ripe for case management under active judicial management, and we're already well in the process of doing that. So as we complete auditing a particular year or period of time, we pick up the cases that we think are ripe for case management, and we allocate them. The JP will then, they'll land on the JP's desk, and the JP will then allocate them appropriately to a judge to case manage. And through that, we intend to get those matters on the roll and finalized. And then the second strategy is a far more ambitious one, and it's one that I think is probably unique to the land court, and I believe we need to embrace it. And the JP supports this project and is right behind it, for which I'm very grateful. What we're doing is we are partnering with our stakeholders and engaging with all of our stakeholders, but it engages Legal Aid South Africa, it engages the Commission, and it engages the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, and it engages, and these are two critical agents in the new process, it engages the Legal Practice Council and the advice officers. So what's happening is that when we identify cases that are inactive, but that are not ripe for allocation to case management, the judge can't do anything with them. What we are about to start piloting, and this is with the cooperation of the LPC and CAUSA and Legal Aid South Africa, is a process where attorneys on a pro bono basis are going to assist us to manage those files and take various steps to work out precisely why it is that that file has become inactive. That'll involve engagement with the Commission and the Department and Legal Aid, to see why is there no legal representation, what's happened in the Commission and so on. And then it's also going to involve, the advice officers are going to play a critical role of providing a bridge between the court and communities, and actually go to claimants and try to support them in reactivating their matters if that's what they want to do. And if that's what they need to do, if need be, by securing legal representation for the case. So it's a very ambitious project, but it's about to be piloted. I do need in this room to acknowledge the support of, there's a commissioner in this room, Commissioner Motolo Tlepu, who's been actively involved in this project, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about. And also to acknowledge CAUSA. As an organization, they are very excited about this, and their community, or their paralegals are already being brought into the project. We're about to start rolling out training so that people can be assisted in how to approach this, because it's not an easy task. If one goes back into a community that's been sitting for sometimes 20 years, to try and reactivate a case, it's not straightforward. And so we're trying to, again, engage with stakeholders to see how to do this in a, in a appropriate way. And so that's what we're doing. But the logistics and the resource constraints are, which is what the JP is alluding to, are extremely heavy. And as a court, we're struggling to deliver on this. We will do it. It's the last thing I do. It's what I'm going to do. But we don't have enough researchers to help us. We don't have enough admin staff to work on the files. We don't have enough data capturers to capture the data. We're struggling still with, we're working on Excel spreadsheets, which we don't have sufficient skills to develop those sheets into a proper database. So we just don't have the resources to do it. But we are rolling it out with what we have. At the moment, we're going to pilot the data from 3 years, which is the years from 2013 to 2016, because that data is in reasonably good shape, we believe. In fact, there are people working on it this week, and we're hoping to finalize that data in the next week or two, and we're hoping to start training in about a month. But most of this is off the back of people who are volunteering their time or through other stakeholders who are supporting the court. And ideally, the court would be able to do this without having to reach out in this way. So, JP, I hope I've answered the question. I think you're...
A long career spanning over more than 20 years.
Yes.
And you also held many leadership positions. Can you tell me how does the leadership that you acquired over a period of time in different areas have contributed to your legal career and the work that you're currently doing in the Land Court?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I mean, I practiced for 20 years at the bar, initially in Cape Town and then here in Johannesburg. I actually moved up to Johannesburg. Well, in Cape Town, I had a lot of cases that involved the interaction between customary law and gender. So I was involved in the cases that secured property rights for women who were living under customary law, the Bear case, the cases that dealt with primogeniture and the property regimes governed in customary marriages. And that's helped me to understand a lot about what happens in the spaces where we work, and how cases can be run effectively in those spaces. When I moved up to Johannesburg, one of the main reasons I did so was because I was offered a position at the Legal Resources Centre. And one of the primary areas of work of the Legal Resources Centre in the Constitutional Litigation Unit was rural land work, and I really wanted to do that. But through that, I was exposed to working with communities in land matters, and again, I think that's given me an appreciation of what's required in order to finalize extremely challenging cases. And I think that helps me as a judge, and it helps me to help litigants. We have inquisitorial powers in our court, as you know, JP, and I think that my experience in this area of law allows me to use those powers effectively to assist people to finalize cases, hard cases. And then I suppose in other leadership positions throughout my career, I've always tried to put my hand up to help with whatever is needed in the space where I am. So at the Legal Resources Centre, I acted for a period as the acting director of the CLU. And at the bar, I would put my hand up for committees. I served, for example, on the committee. I served with Commissioner Beloy as the co-chairs on the committee that was revising the sexual harassment policy for the Johannesburg bar. So that kind of committee work has helped me to understand how to work within an institution to build its systems. And I think there are many examples that I could point to. I worked in the state on the legal committee for the Medicines Control Council, which also helped me to understand something around how the state works. And I suppose the final one I'd mention is my time at the Constitutional Court. I was there as a clerk for the late Chief Justice Chaskelson at an extraordinary time in history. And we were, so I hadn't, at that stage I was just his researcher, but I had an opportunity to observe him and the late Chief Justice Langer in leadership, and to watch what they were doing to build the Constitutional Court. Yes, and such as the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, creating the Parliamentary Monitoring Group when I was in my first job. That was a joint initiative of IDASA, Black Sash, and the organization I was working for, which is the Human Rights Committee. So I've got a sense of how to build institutions.
Just one last question. You mentioned that you were involved in putting together sexual harassment policy.
Yes.
That's what I recall. And I think yesterday, the spokesperson for this body also mentioned the sexual harassment policy. And I'm aware that the heads of courts, the Chief Justice, that policy is in its draft form. If I may ask you, if you were faced with a complaint of sexual harassment as DJP, how would you deal with it?
Thank you. What I've learned from, well, firstly, the first port of call would need to be the policies that are put in place within the institutions, and obviously it's a critical step forward within the judiciary that we've got a sexual harassment policy that we can turn to. So I think it's a critical moment, and that was happening before I was on the bench, so I haven't been involved in that process, but it's something that I support. In my experience with dealing with sexual harassment matters, which I've dealt with both from the perspective of policy development and representing people when I was at the bar, there are various dimensions that need to be observed. The one is that most policies distinguish between the formal and the informal process. And the informal process becomes really important in trying to mediate as a first step often, if it's what people want to do. If the complainant wants to follow an informal process, it can become critically important in mediating what are very difficult power dimensions. So the first thing I would do would be to explore whether following an informal approach is the right thing to do in that case. I'd have to engage on questions around confidentiality, because obviously the power relations are such that can play out very harshly in a given case. There are some cases that can't be dealt with so serious, and one needs to I think sometimes there are times one has to override the wishes of someone to keep something low key because of the seriousness of what one's dealing with. And then I would see my role as ensuring that the formal process can be followed in a way that's very supportive of the complainant. Complainants need support in these processes, and there are different ways in which that can be shaped. But I would pay a lot of attention to ensuring that the complainant was duly supported through the process that would then follow.
Thank you, Cedric.
Have you finished, JP?
I think I should finish now.
Thank
Give
you.
other commissioners an opportunity.
All
to
right.
speak the whole day to.
Just one follow-up question on the last question that was put to you about sexual harassment. You speak of an informal approach and a serious, and I guess, versus a minor case of sexual harassment. How do you, first, what is the informal approach?
Thank you, Chief Justice. The informal approach with which I'm familiar in the areas where I've worked, and it's not always appropriate, entails, it can entail different things, and it partly depends on the wishes of the complainant as to how they want to proceed, because sometimes complainants simply don't want to reveal their identities. And if that's the case, then you become quite confined in how much you can actually do for fairness reasons, because people need to be given due notice of any complaint against them from an Audi perspective. But if you can, there are ways, and there's certain circumstances where you can resolve problems in the workplace without even revealing someone's identity, and that involves partly educative processes, and it involves partly engaging the alleged aggressor in a way that speaks to what's required in the workplace, but that isn't accusatory of specific conduct. So one tries to, you take the information that you get and say, well, this is happening in the workplace, and you then try to, you use your influence to say, well, this is how we want things done. We don't want things done in this space for this reason. But you can't go from there to a formal disciplinary process because of Audi. There are other informal processes which will depend on consent, so mediation will be consent-based. Sometimes it's just a matter of sitting with two people, the two people involved, with an independent person, but in a not a formal mediation, but you try to navigate that space. And there, I suppose, in leadership, sometimes as a leader, you might be the right person to do that, but quite often it will be someone else. And what's important is that you have relationships with people who are able to perform that role, who can step in and say, well, I'm happy to sit and talk this through and ensure that the right standards are being observed and what's expected of whoever it is, if it's a judge or a member of staff who's the alleged aggressor.
I just want to ask, since you say you have had occasion to deal with cases in this area, do you have a definition of sexual harassment in a case as opposed to a serious case?
I do have definitions. I don't have them with me, and I'd want to pull them out. But I mean, I think that what's at the heart of the definition really is around unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, and which generates discomfort. So it's quite a low threshold, actually. When you look at I think the more progressive definitions of sexual harassment, you come within the definition quite quickly, and partly because of that. And then there's a debate about whether it's an objective or a subjective test, or something in between. But I think partly because of the challenges around, partly because there needs to be a wide definition. There can be an example, for example, I think the example we were using in one of our policy spaces was, what if someone comes up to you at the photocopying machine and